Gene Eells is, I don't know what you have your Ph.D. in. What is it, Gene?
It's an agricultural education.
Okay. And she has a real interesting story. I've heard about it because her story involves using sociology to figure out how to communicate with people. And anything in sociology really interests me because you can't move people if you don't understand how they work. So, and I've known her, I don't know, quite a while. I assume it goes back to the early 90s.
Yes, I was going to say it's definitely in the 90s, and I think early 90s. So, yeah.
We joined the fellowship in 89, but might not have met me the first day. Okay, go ahead, Jean.
Sure. Well, I am so happy to be with you tonight and looking forward to some lively discussion. So I've decided to do a PowerPoint just because I've got some slides that I think might be interesting for those of you from different parts of the country, which I think is great. You'll get a window into what's going on. And so I want to just start out by saying that you are connected to farm soil. Shouldn't be a real surprise, but I want to just quickly review some of the things that we know that you are connected. So you're connected in at least 6 different ways. You're connected through drinking water safety and treatment costs for any public water supply that you're attached to. You're also connected through to farm soils through the nutritional value of the products and the nutrient density of that food is very closely tied to the soil health, and how quality the soil is affects how quality the food is. And then you're also connected for certainly recreational water and wildlife, which doesn't get to pick what water it drinks from. It has to have good, clean water as well. Then inputs to prop up the yields, they don't stay in the fields. And we know that from a variety of ways. So you're still connected to farm soils by the fact that we need to be aware of what's moving about in our farming communities. And certainly climate change reduces yields. They're struggling with that a great deal. They put a lot of money into germplasm and changing the crops to try and stay ahead of the curve, but the climate is changing enough so that it's depressing the potential for crops to yield well. And certainly when we have flooding and that, it comes a lot from the amount of rain that we're getting, but we also know that our farm soils are not absorbing water as well as they should. It's really a bummer. I mean, in a major way, because those soils the farmers are also needing to use that water and need it at other times of the year. So you end up with high heat, the winter changes, and we don't have winters that kill off the pests. So it's kind of a cascade of problems. And you are also tied to crop insurance premiums. 60% of a crop insurance premium that a farmer pays to have crop insurance, if there's a failure, 60% of the premium is paid by taxpayers. That comes out of farm bill payments. So crop insurance premiums, you're helping to pay for those crop insurance premiums. And then certainly payouts. When there's large payouts, that's got to come from somewhere. So I'm going to give you a couple of uncommon farm facts that we don't necessarily talk about, or when we think about them, it helps us frame our discussion and conceptualize things in a little bit different way. So farmers don't own all the land they farm. On the one hand, it seems obvious if you know anything about agriculture or talk about farming with anybody. But when we hear that in the news, when we hear about farming and agriculture, we tend to conflate farmers and landowners, because we'll say farmers and landowners in the same sentence. And conceptually, we assume that farmers are in charge of all of the land that they farm, and they aren't necessarily. And in Illinois and Iowa, as much as 60% of the farmland is rented by landowners to farmers, 60%. So you get the social dynamics of who's calling the shots, who gets to decide how the land is farmed, what it's used for, whether it's eroding or not. How is it all going, how's it all working? And I will say that Iowa is number one in soil erosion. Not exactly a farm fact that you're going to find on certain websites. It's just not going to be something that people are going to shout about, but we have to talk about this, and we have to recognize that landowners are a key part to all of what is going on in agriculture. And a lot of times we get a pass. I share a small farm in Iowa with my siblings, and a lot of times we get a pass because the focus ends up being on farmers as if they're the only decision makers. Another uncommon fact is that women own about 40% of the ag land nationwide, own or co-own. They're present. They can influence how farming is done. They can influence how their land is done. And I've spent a lot of my educational and professional career working with women who own farmland but don't know anything about the conservation practices. They don't know how to stop erosion. They don't know that it can be stopped, that it can be stopped, and there's cost share to help them do that. So women get left out. They're the most invisible people in agriculture. Now, women landowners, and I want to pause and stop and think about that. If I asked you to draw a picture of a woman farmer, you'd know where to start. But I ask you to draw a picture of a woman landowner, and what do we all look like? Where we've been bankers or insurance agents or teachers or nurses or something else for all of our careers. And maybe we have not been on the farm. Maybe we've inherited that farmland, or we were only peripheral to the agriculture that went on. Some women were very involved, very much involved in that bookkeeping. They were great at keeping the farms going. And during the 80s, they had, lots of jobs on the farm, maybe helping make decisions. But if you think about that whole population distribution, you don't have all the women who are active in farming who own the land. So when you think about who can make that difference, not only do we need to hold landowners' feet to the heat, women are a part of that. And we have to make the conversation about who can make that change and help them make that change. And how can we make that happen? And so we've got some good things that are going on in that regard, helping women get connected to the resources, help them make up for lost time and learning how to manage their land so that it produces clean water and good soil and healthy food. But we've got to talk to them, and we've got to recognize, and they are so invisible, women as landowners. In Iowa, we know from fairly thorough survey techniques that women own or co-own as much as half the land in Iowa. So now I'm going to take you on a visual tour. That's been a lot of text on the screen. Because this is something about, this starts to lead into what you can do. But I want you to take a look at some things. You need to be aware of the agriculture that's going on in your area. And I can tell you that most of us, even those of us in farm country, don't necessarily see the degradation of the soil that's going on. So this could have been taken today. It's very windy here. They are in the fields just doing their early spring tillage. And I can tell you, when this picture was taken, it was just barely 2 days after a rain. And the dust kicked up almost obscures the tractor. You can drive for mile after mile after mile and see farmers in the field with tractors and tillage equipment. And this is the what you would see. Well, it's pretty easy to think, oh, look at that. You know, they're out in the fields, and assume that everything is okay. When you understand what's going on with soil degradation around the world, even China is having problems with their soils being less productive. They're being degraded the same way, the same reasons. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And you realize that even if this is common, it's not normal. A soil 2 days after rain shouldn't be shedding that much dust. So learn to see what it is with the agriculture in your area, where the degradation is. If there's any tillage happening, that's a problem. It's degrading the soils. And I know, yes, our gardens, gee, we like to fluff it all up and get that tiller out in the spring and fluff things up. You're degrading your soil, and it's happening without hardly even noticing. Here's another image. This was not in Iowa this year, but this year in Iowa was tremendous soil loss. So there's actually snow in the ditch, road ditch, underneath all of that black, which came off of this field and covered the snowbank. So you drive by mile after mile of this and you think, oh, gee, kind of too bad. Just because it's common doesn't mean that it's normal. It's certainly not a good sign. And once you see and understand that kind of soil loss shouldn't be happening, and that it's a product of tillage and our agricultural practices, then you realize we've got to change something, and we got to change it fast. And here's another one. You think, oh boy, what a ding dong for driving into the mud puddle. Well, it really wasn't. Big equipment gets stuck in fields where the soil has been degraded and it doesn't hold up equipment. Even if it's a little bit dampish, it should. And so they're having troubles with deeper ruts, and they end up with more tillage. They go along the end rows of a field and they till and till and till because they got to try to get rid of the compaction. They're compounding the problem. And they don't necessarily always realize that they're compounding it, or they're concerned that things aren't going to look right and somebody's going to complain. So once you start seeing soil erosion and soil degradation, it's tied to water quality problems. It's tied to all these other problems that we have talked about. So let's jump right into what can you do? You know, I know one of you is from Massachusetts. I'm not sure where some of the other states are. What can you do? You know, if you're not on a farm or have ag ground, learn to read what's going on in your area. See with new eyes. Look to see what's going on that is evidence of farming practices that are degrading the soil, and look for farming practices that are improving the soil. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Recognize that soil degradation is going on everywhere, worldwide. This is a big issue. People from lots of different countries are getting together and talking about the concern that they have about our ability to raise crops, have those crops be resilient in the face of climate change. And it's a serious, serious issue. Ask questions. We've got to get this to a point where there's more conversation about it, and you can help with that. You don't have to have anything to do with farming, but you can start asking questions in all kinds of settings. Maybe you're at a yoga group and say, you know, I was noticing XYZ about the farming, or do you know anybody that has a farm? Do you know anybody that is raising food? Are they using cover crops? And you can learn that language of things that you can ask. Innocent questions start to put people on notice. What you put attention to starts to get energy there. And then there's hope. I wanted to let you know that it's not all hopeless. There's hope in this. And there are farmers, again, worldwide, who are leading the way. We just need a lot more of them to get moving and start adopting the practices. Some of the things that I'll just touch on very lightly are the best news in agriculture. They are win, 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 because consumers win, farmers end up making more profit so that they aren't in what I call that suicide zone where the margins are so tight. I lived through the 1980s, and farmers were indeed killing themselves because they were not making enough money. They were terrified they were losing their farms. And if we can do anything we can to help them stay healthy and ready to go on their farms, I think that's a helpful thing. We win because we've got people that understand. We start cleaning up the water. We start improving things for wildlife, improving things for workers that are picking crops and working in the fields. It's a win-win. So I think there's some exciting things. So let me touch on what those are. Just two of them. This is a huge, huge, complicated topic. But cover crops are something that are used in places that are too wet, too dry, too short a season. They're too cold, all that kind of stuff. People will say, oh, we can't use those here. Yes, you can. You can figure out how to use cover crops, and we have got to start using cover crops or keeping the ground in living roots most of the year. Perennial crops would be outstanding if we can get to that. Having more than one crop in the year. We've got some farmers in Iowa that I'm following on social media, and they are really charging along the path of getting things that are going to keep feeding that soil. And they're finding that they're more profitable when they feed that soil and keep it healthy and not put on all the inputs. Some of them are starting to use less of the fertilizer. Some are using no fertilizer. Some of them are not even taking crop insurance because they know their soil is going to handle whatever comes at them. So there's hopeful news out there, but start to learn what cover crops are used in your area and get used to the look. So if you look here, looks like grass, looks like weeds growing in the middle of the rows. That's the cover crop that was planted after the corn was harvested. This is a field of corn stubble, and you can recognize those as you're driving around your countryside. If somebody's left the stubble or the remnants of the crop, whatever it was, wheat, it doesn't matter what crop it is, and then you start seeing green stuff growing in the early spring or even late fall, you can start to recognize cover crops in your area. And probably not a lot of farmers using it, maybe 5%, 10, not hardly even 10%, 5%, 7% in the area. So we're slow at getting that adopted, but once they do, most of them have a lot of fun because they're actually growing something again. And it's an interesting process. Stopping tillage. And boy, is that a tough one for them to give up, because there's decades they learn to plow from grandpa and, their dad and their dad. So some of this stuff goes back generations, and we're starting to really have problems with that degraded soil. It's pulverized, it compacts, they have problems with drainage. And so there are ways of helping farmers transition. If they can't just go cold turkey right away and give up their tillage equipment, they can use strip till, which just tills. This field here has just a little tiny strip that's tilled, and you can see that it's black. That's our typical Iowa soils, but that is a way of helping them bridge full-on tillage to no-till, and that can be an important transition. So we need to learn how to support farmers making those choices, because I'm telling you what, some of the changes are huge. Not impossible, very manageable, but conceptually, and I'll use a cooking analogy, it would be as challenging for me who learned how to cook in the 70s with, opening cans of this and Cool Whip that, and, working with meat and all that stuff, to be asked to cook a banquet for even 10 people and do it all vegan next week. And the shift in what it would take me to do that and have a tasty meal scare the bejeebers out of me. Okay. If I had enough time, all that kind of stuff, took classes, yeah, it's possible. But these are people that have their livelihood on the line year after year. Many of them only have a 1-year contract on the farmland that they farm. Remember, we said they don't own all the land they farm. And they're scared to make that change. So our approach when I've been working with women farmland owners is a very positive approach. What can you do to support that change? And they're delighted to have that conversation once they realize that they can have the conversation and have it be a supportive one, not just an antagonistic conversation. Change happens, and we're getting wonderful things to happen. One of the other things is get used to seeing more residue. We've got to have more residue on the ground to help protect from raindrop. And there is a whole herd, a micro herd of bacteria in the soil that need the carbon that is in the residue. They need that food source. And so we've got to have the residue from the last year's crop. It needs to be on the ground so the microbes can get to it and chew it up, feed on that all winter long, all summer long. And once the micro herd is healthy, you hardly see any residue because they're just gobbling it up. And some of the farmers that have really active soils laugh about not wanting to stumble and fall because they won't make it out of the field because their micro herd is lively as it should be, and they're supporting the plants and they're working in concert with the roots. So there's a lot that we've learned about soil health, and we need to have more conversations about what that is. So again, what can you do? Ask questions. Start asking about what's going on. Find out what the leading edge regenerative practices are. And buzzwords are hard to keep up with. Right now, if you started looking for regenerative agriculture, that would give you something that you could hang on to. Farm bill discussions are coming up right now. We've got things that are happening, and anybody that's making change, I don't care whether it's urban farmers who are looking at soil health, they can use cover crops also. Small market farms, larger market farms, larger commercial farms. If we're going to ask farmers to make these changes to protect our soil, water, and make our soil resilient in the face of climate change, we need coaches for them. They need to have a person that they can ask a question on the fly. And having a real person you can ask is still the best thing to do. You're going to pick up the phone and call somebody. You're going to find out, if I'm going to do, what rate do I need to plant? What do I need to order? I'm having troubles with my drill. Do I need to change the coulters and the sweeps? And, how do I need to manage this equipment? They need that personal stuff. And we have gone through so much downsizing in the organizations assuming that you can get everything you need off the internet. We need real live people again in the organizations and the agencies to coach farmers through this transition. They are not going to get through there without help. And their commercial certified crop advisors, some of them are on board, some of them aren't. So looking at ways to support funding, advocating for funding for people in the organizations to help coach through that transition. Hold landowners accountable. Don't just pile the burden on farmers. Landowners are the ones that can make change. I have the burden. That's my call. I rent the land to a farmer. I say that we're going to do these things. Takes a lot of courage, particularly for women, particularly for men who have not been involved in agriculture. It feels a little audacious, and some of the farmers would like you to think that you don't have a say. So you get a full range, and then you get some farmers who are so excited to have their landowner asking questions. They're proud of what they do. If they're using cover crops and no-till, they want to know that you're with them, that you're supportive. I had a conversation with a farmer and the lady the other day, and he was afraid to bring up cover crops because he was afraid that she wouldn't like the way it looked. She was afraid to bring up cover crops to him because she was afraid it was going to cost him too much, and she just didn't understand all of those pieces. Once I got them together, they had that conversation. I'm telling you what, we've got 80 acres of row crop in Iowa that's going to have cover crops on it this year because we had a conversation. So don't think that those conversations don't matter. Hold landowners. Remember, it's the landowners who make the difference. And we just haven't changed that narrative. So because we're UUs, I'm going to mention that we can kick up a higher level. These are not my ideas. I'm sharing some ideas that have come from others. Are these going to happen? Probably not, but you start with an audacious idea. These may be too radical, maybe not, but let's talk about what those might be. Let's just think about what could happen. What if we took that crop insurance that we are supporting and we tie it to regenerative practices? Right now, there is no connection, and there is powerful objection to that, powerful lobbying against that. So, will it happen or not? But, tie it to cover crops. One of the practices that's happening in Iowa is that farmers get a $5 an acre discount for using cover crops. Now that's spreading to some other states, that particular program, because insurance companies, I will focus on this, insurance companies recognize that there is less risk when the soils are resilient. The resilient soils are going to be what gets us through the future. So the insurance companies don't mind giving that $5 discount to the farmers. Let's work with that. It's not a horrible idea. And then let's talk about the companies. Oh, plan for transition from ethanol. In Iowa, more than 40% of our corn doesn't feed people or animals. It goes into ethanol. Now, ethanol is at least a substitute for some of the gasoline, keeps us tied to fossil fuels, supports a tremendous amount of our economy. The political power behind supporting ethanol is enormous. Well, I kind of get that, because what would we do if we didn't have ethanol plants? Where would we sell our corn? We have a lot of infrastructure to deal with. But we could talk about what else we could use those plants for, the ethanol plants, or could we deconstruct them in some way, reuse materials? Could we, gosh, grow something else in these corn and soybean acres? We're going to need something that's still kind of a grass base. It's an annual crop. Our climate and weather patterns are kind of fixed in the sense of what we're going to be able to grow. So corn is still a good option, but maybe we don't have as many acres of corn. Maybe we put back some of those fence rows. Maybe we put back some of those wild areas that were torn out in 2012, 2013. And some of those, we've lost a lot of wildlife habitat. Kind of a radical thought, but can we start planning? What would we do? How would we help support people and jobs, et cetera? And then the last one I'll mention, again, these are not my original ideas by a long shot, but expecting companies to put up. If they are claiming to be green, let's have the companies be regenerative certified. There's some talk every now and then of farmers being certified, and farmers who are organic certified, that's a different sort of pathway. But let's flip that certification from putting it on farmers and all the documentation, all the bookkeeping and all that stuff. How about some of the suppliers, the buyers of those products and the processors? If we want as consumers to buy nutrient-dense foods that are high quality, what would happen if we had those companies be certified and be transparent about those processes? So John Kempf is a real innovative thinker, and I put up a link to a YouTube, which I could also paste in the chat or whatever we can do. And he had an 18-minute keynote at an event in early February. And he talks about this whole idea of regenerative companies so that you could buy regenerative products. So it's worth watching. It's only 18 minutes. He has a lot of other really interesting things to say, challenging. He's Amish, and so you won't see him on the video. He was on the event for the Zoom for the event, but he's got a picture of his logo over his face for the video so that you can hear it. And he's way out in front as a thinker and a businessman who has a tremendous business of regenerative ag products and such. So just some food for thought. And I'm going to bring my comments to a close. I've talked a little longer than I meant to, Terry, but hopefully it's okay. And I don't know if you have a particular protocol for handling questions. If there are questions in chat or Facebook, you'll have to read them to me because I'm not on that. So, and I'll stop sharing. This is a fun exercise as you're listening to people comment about agriculture on TV and listening to advertising. When the conversation is about yield and farmers are talking about yield only, that's much more of a corporate message because you got to have a high yield in order to have something to sell. If you don't have the yield, and here's where the dollars. That's where, if they focus only on yield, they're missing the opportunities to lower those input costs and spend less. Now, how popular do you think that message is going to be if it starts to gain some traction? Yeah, there will be some more effective pushback than what we've had, but recognizing that there is that kind of conversational difference. So if you're talking about profit, then you've got somebody that understands that they can control those input costs by using regenerative practices. Now, this is a 3 to 5 year or more transition. That's why we have to recognize that farmers need support through that process. It may be in the form of cost share to help them adopt those practices. It may be in the form of a lease arrangement where the landowner maybe helps pay for 90% of the cover crop cost, the seed and the putting the seed in the ground. Then the next year it's 80%, 70%, 60%, 50%, and then you hold at 50% where you share in that cost, because that's always going to build your soil, and your soil is your asset. So that's a process. Let me share a slide and we'll deconstruct this one just a little bit. This is from Dr. Jerry Hatfield. He presented this to the UN Committee on Water, and his focus of the talk was water efficiency. Dr. Jerry Hatfield was with the, gosh, they changed the name of the institute at Iowa State, but it was the National Soil Health Institute, basically. And he's retired from that, and he's unfettered now, let me tell you. Listening to him talk is a lot of fun. But the chart here on the left with the blue and the orange bars are where he's worked with data from a farmer who adopted no-till and cover crops and had 16 years of very detailed records. That's a real key, detailed records. And so the blue is the county average for corn. And this was this farmer's average over time. So it's percent increase in yields proportionate to seasonal rainfall. So his soils were using the rainfall more efficiently than other soils because they were better. Soybeans.
Jane, I'm sorry, but the orange is the name of the person, not the name of the county.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So this is Wayne Fredericks up in Mitchell County.
Yeah.
And so Wayne's fields were just that. His soils, after 16 years of this, have done this. So they were stable, more stable. The yields were more stable among the years. There was less variation. It's a good thing. Standard deviation in yields, half of the conventional till. Increased water efficiency. And here's the one that I think is really exciting. If you're interested in the climate connection, when we have April and May rainfalls that are high, and we end up with some low yields that are tied to that, if we don't get rain in July and August, a lot of times we end up with higher yields. The soil was so resilient, it broke that issue. It broke the correlation so that his soils, it doesn't matter if you have a dry spell in July and August and you don't get the yields. It doesn't matter if it rains a lot in May and April. It doesn't matter. His soils are going to produce a crop no matter what. That's what soil health can do. That's what our regenerative practices can do. And we got to get going, because you can't get to 16 years of success until you start. And we have to start. I'm happy to say that I'm 6 years into cover crops and no-till. We're starting to see it. Last year we turned a corner, and I've got tough soil. It's real heavy, wet, and clay and all that kind of stuff, and turned, and my tenant is thrilled. So
well, I'm going to thank you. I don't want to cut anybody off. Are there any more questions?
Just an appreciation. Thank you so much, Gene. I enjoyed all the facts that you gave us in the beginning, and I'm enlightened. I don't think I'll ever go back to farming, but It's good to know.
Yeah,
Good stuff. No, thank you very much.
Thank you very
thanks.
much.
You're welcome.
Oh, I thought
Okay.
very educational. Even though I'm not a farmer, the program was very educational.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Jim. Okay,
Hope to see
good
you guys
night.